It's the history of Eastern Europe and the Middle East. It's the history of Eastern Europe and the Middle East. It's the history of Eastern Europe and the Middle East. It's the history of Eastern Europe and the Middle East. It's the history of Eastern Europe and the Middle East. It's the history of Eastern Europe and the Middle East. It's the history of Eastern Europe.
Before we get into these ancient empires, I swear to ya, we must get into the religions that started in their area. 3 religions, all monotheistic, meaning one God, all stem from this guy named Abraham. Now hold on. We got Judaism, Christianity, and don't forget Islam. 1800 BC, 100 CE, 610 CE, respectively. They're different in writings and symbols and buildings and practices and in beliefs. But don't get it wrong, they're similar to it as rabbis, imams, or as priests. Let's focus in on Islam. Its followers, called Muslims, pray 5 times a day, fast during Ramadan, some of their customs. Established in the Middle East because of this guy, Muhammad, a prophet, gained many followers because his beliefs were solid. After his death, 4 caliphs took over, then the Umayyads took over, then the Abbasids took over. Phew. Let's slower down and take a second to look at their accomplishments, achievements in art, medicine, science, literature. That's as good as it gets.
It's the history of Eastern Europe and the Middle East. It's the history of Eastern Europe and the Middle East. It's the history of Eastern Europe and the Middle East. It's the history of Eastern Europe and the Middle East. It's the history of Eastern Europe and the Middle East. It's the history of Eastern Europe and the Middle East. It's the history of Eastern Europe.
Let's go. With all that out the way, let's talk about ancient Rome, one of the most famous empires in all of history. Don't you know? Many famous rulers, Caesar, Augustus, even Tiberius, started as a monarchy, became a republic. Yeah, I'm serious. By 51 BC, they had controlled most of Europe. Around 180 CE was their height. Yeah, they put up. However, the Roman Empire landed in some trouble when Constantine took over, and then he made it double. He split the Roman Empire into 2 different parts. There was West and East Roman Empire, which got new starts. The East continued Roman law, Hellenistic art, had great schools, combined Greek and Roman culture in their stuff. They were no fools. The West and East, called the Byzantine Empire, had some conflictions. See, they argued about icons and religious jurisdictions. Here's one thing for certain, the West wasn't really doing well, but on the other hand, the Byzantines excelled. Yeah.
It's the history of Eastern Europe and the Middle East. It's the history of Eastern Europe and the Middle East. It's the history of Eastern Europe and the Middle East. It's the history of Eastern Europe and the Middle East. It's the history of Eastern Europe and the Middle East. It's the history of Eastern Europe and the Middle East. It's the history of Eastern Europe.
Let's go. Constantinople, capital named after Constantine. Crossroads between trades along the land and the sea. Brought in tons of people, brought in tons of money. Buildings influenced by both Asian and European countries. The Byzantines were important when it comes down to culture, with advancements in mosaics and law and in sculpture. Constantinople had a rapidly growing population. This empire had it all with art, books, army, and education. However, nothing lasts forever, and the same holds true for this empire, for there were many pressures. For example, an attack from crusaders had left them weak, and internal struggles attacking from within man, it's bleak. And don't forget Justinian I left the army scattered, plague had him battered, and financial problems had him shattered. The final blow came 529 1453, when the Turks charged from all sides and ended this great legacy. History of Eastern Europe and the Middle East.
We going back to ancient Rome with this one.
It's the history of Eastern Europe.
Justinian I mean, he did good, but like,
it's the history of Eastern Europe and the Middle East.
Who expected that from the first?
Eastern Europe and the
Ottoman
Middle
Empire
East.
went crazy.
History. It's the history.
Constantinople, you know, they
It's
held
the
up.
history
They
of
tried to
Eastern
defend.
Europe and the Middle East.
They have what, like 8,000 soldiers?
Eastern Europe
And the Turks have like, what, 100,000? That's
Eastern Europe.
pretty crazy.
East. It's the
I mean, how do you
It's the
like,
it's the
what?
history
That's
of Eastern
crazy.
Europe and the Middle East. It's the
Yeah.
history of Eastern Europe and the Middle East. It's the history. It's the history. It's the history of